As artists, we often focus on the technicalities of how to get better. The craft, our tools, techniques, building great foundation. But frequently, it's actually the mindsets that we need to build as an artist that can make all the difference. What I want to talk about in this video is something that I find trips up a huge number of students and people who are beginning on their artistic journey. And this is the creator versus the consumer, and what I like to call the consumer trap. What happened early on for me is that I wanted to be a comic book artist, and I went to a lot of local groups where I was surrounded by other people who also wanted to draw comics. And what I noticed is that there were two distinct types of people there. There were those who were still stuck in fandom, and they would spend the entire session complaining about how Jim Lee drew Batman for this particular issue, and this artist was doing this, and what they liked and what they didn't like. And then there were the other artists, the people who were actually making things. And I noticed there's a distinct difference between these two ways of thinking about our role in the world and what we actually do as artists. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name is Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. If you want to learn more about illustration or picture making, you can check out my free illustration mini workshop. This charts my journey going from someone who really wasn't that good at drawing or art to becoming a professional artist, being published. I discuss topics such as how to get more detail and polish in your work, how to think about composition, creating thumbnails for your scenes, as well as a few ideas surrounding how to think about getting professional work. It's free, and the link will be in the description, so if that's something you're interested in, go check it out. Let's firstly just see if we can unpack this concept of what I mean here. This transition from artists who often are very well-meaning, and this was me early on, where because we often grow up as people who are consuming things, and I know there's a lot of modern parlance and terminology around people who are consuming content and people who are making content. I'm really just talking not necessarily in terms of making social posts or whatever. This just relates to the concept of being an artist, where we grow up consuming things, watching shows, reading books, and a big part of being a consumer, and there's nothing wrong with this, it's just a mindset, is that we are judging things. We grow up thinking about which is our favorite musician, which is our favorite band, which is our favorite movie, our TV show, our artist. And I think this is just a really natural thing to do, is we're sort of comparing, we're selecting, we're consuming, we're picking. And the reality is this often leads us down, and I'll unpack this, not just a consumer of stuff, but also like literally that we think purchasing and buying things is often the answer to us getting better. So there's a lot of different levels to this, and I'm not going into this on a sort of capitalism versus communism sort of thing. Often people leave funny sort of comments that seem like it's kind of picked out of the Communist Manifesto, or talking about sort of Ayn Rand or something like that. And it's like, look, this is just about art. It's just about what it means to be an artist, right? At the core of what we do. Often, though, it does mean that in the beginning, we are thinking about, hey, which thing do I buy? What do I do? How do I select the right thing? And we kind of have this attitude that this is about knowledge, that if I know, like a lot of artists who are in the beginning, students kind of think that, like, if I could just pick and select the best artists that I think are the best and then just kind of copy them, then that'll be it. Like, you're kind of just picking and consuming things and collecting things and acquiring knowledge. And if I just buy the right tools and the right stuff, everything's going to change, and then that's going to make a difference, right? If you buy a different pen or whatever, that is in some way going to make a difference. And this is just fundamentally an attitude of a consumer, of someone who is picking, deciding, choosing. And I think it's important to understand that the role of a creator is slightly different. A role of a creator is where we're looking at what we have around us right now and what we can make within the limitations of our own abilities, of our own tools, what we have around us. And often, quite frankly, a lot of the technical limitations and scheduling and budgetary limitations that are put upon us as artists, right? Every professional artist is probably going to be able to make better work if they were given more time. But we're often not. We're often on a budget. And that is a literal time budget. It's a literal monetary budget where, like, I can't spend an unlimited amount of time on every comic book page, on every concept art, on every illustration, whether that's for a book cover or a trading card game. If you had more time, you could make it better. If you had the infinity of being able to study more, you'd get it better. But fundamentally, when you change your ideology from someone who is just consuming things to someone who's creating things, it becomes purely about thinking about, what do you have right now? Like, what do I have right now? Right now, what can I make with this that's really good? And we start to get more creative with the usage of our tools, with the usage of the knowledge and the skills that we do have. And everything really becomes geared around dealing with those challenges and overcoming those challenges and understanding the struggle of creating things. And for me, this really was just that difference between there being a room full of people, and some of them, like, we all said we wanted to draw comics. We all said that we wanted to become professional artists, but some of us were still stuck in, like, judging other people. And I think the other thing that we'll unpack here is that this concept of judgment, of going from a consumer attitude where, like, you are judging every single thing you do and every single thing other people are doing, and your job is to pick the best thing, is that can often mean that when we put our work out there, we feel as if we're going to get judged. And what that often means is, because we're still stuck in that fan attitude, we never make anything, because you realize that there's a futility there, that it's futile to try and make something perfect, because maybe you're going to be one of those people that everyone laughs at, that you're going to be one of those comic book artists that fall short for whatever reason. And it's often that fear that comes from a fan consumptive attitude that can stop us from even making anything in the first place, and more importantly, putting it out into the world. Because art is not just a matter of making it behind closed doors. Part of being an artist and a creator of things is that we do create them and we do put them out there, and that we are judged, and we're often judged harshly. But that's just part of the process. All right, so firstly, if we just try and unpack that concept, go a little bit deeper on it, let's just try and meditate on this concept of the consumer nature, like the literal purchasing, the monetary, capitalistic, and this is where, again, we would verge a little bit more into the capitalism versus, sort of socialist ideologies, and how we're often sort of trained to purchase things as a way to self-actualize and kind of all that stuff. Like, yeah, that's kind of interesting. But mostly there's just a practical element here whereby in the beginning, we often do think that if we buy the right tool, the classic example of the artist on their journey is that we ask, what pencil do I use? And by inference, what pencil do I buy? I fell for this trap. Like, I bought $500 or like $700 worth of markers early on, and I never used them. I'd sort of tell this story often in like little emails, and as an anecdote is that, like, early on, I really had no idea how to make art, and I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know what even a process was. I didn't know what tools I needed to use. I really was stuck. There wasn't any internet back then. And so I would just be like buying different tools and kind of thinking that, like, the next thing that I bought, the next tutorial that I watched, the next book that I bought, and I would often just spend hours and days just collecting reference and buying art books and kind of trying to get closer to this thing. But it was often, the answer was stuck in that problem of like buying markers that I didn't know how to use, and thinking like, well, maybe if I bought more colors, my marker renderings would turn out better, right? I wasn't looking at how you would actually build up the tones, why you would need different colors. Could I color mix? Could you not color mix? Like, how would I blend colors? What was the best paper? I was just kind of sitting there thinking, like, if I buy the right things, finally all the puzzle pieces will kind of click together. And I think there's just such an important thing to understand is that often also it's a matter of thinking about whether you can collect the right number of references, whether you can collect the right number of tutorials, whether you can figure out who on YouTube to listen to these days would be the parable, right? And what it does is it leads us down, I think, fundamentally the wrong pathway when it comes to using those tools, and understanding that often creativity and artists exist in this kind of little void of creative limitations, where you kind of need to get excited about not having fancy tools. That if you're just given a little bit of plasticine or something, like a little bit of clay, you're kind of thinking, what could I make with that? And even if you don't have the skills as a sculptor, you're still thinking as an artist, but what could I make with that now? Like maybe I don't have the skills that I know. And this is that I know that, I would need to make something really good. And this is often one of the things I see in YouTube comments is people are like, how do I start if I kind of suck, right? If I'm not very good. And the reality is we all kind of are at some point on the journey, and you can always make some art and you can always do something. And you have to always understand your limitations as an artist, what you can and can't do, your knowledge of tools, techniques, processes, foundational concepts, and think about how best can I express myself with what I have. One of the best sort of quotes that I have that is just sort of stamped in my memory is, I think it was from a Jeffrey Jones sketchbook where like he was talking to some artist, and it was just that if you can draw, you can draw with a burnt stick on a brown paper bag. And I think that's like such an important thing to remember. Not that that would be good, but that if you're an artist and you can draw well, you can kind of figure out how to take any tool and try and make something really interesting with it. And the first step that you would do would be to pick up the burnt stick and kind of play around and see what it does and see what it doesn't do, and experiment and just sort of play with it. As opposed to, I think the consumer mindset would just be, well, that's not a good drawing implement, so I won't try. And what it means is that if you look at that expanded and multiplied 1,000,000 times, it means that people who are stuck in a consumptive mindset don't experiment, they don't play, they have fear about playing and experimenting. They're like, oh, well, I wouldn't touch a burnt stick with a brown paper bag because I don't know how to use that. Maybe I should take a course, or maybe I should figure out how to use that, or maybe I should buy a better stick, or like maybe that paper bag is a little bit crumply, right? The artist just makes stuff. You just kind of play around with it. You just have to put yourself out there. You just have to be willing to fail and willing to experiment, because it doesn't matter how good you get. It doesn't matter how many tools you get or how advanced they are, how many markers you have. For me, if you don't know how to use one marker, you're not going to be able to use 500 of them. You're not going to be able to use $500 worth of them. It's just a pointless exercise to think about the value of critiquing the different methods and styles and processes and stuff. You kind of need to get in there and get your hands dirty. You need to figure out what works and what doesn't. And I think the reality is, if you look at the continuum of like, okay, you are wherever you are on your artistic journey, and you probably started at some real larval stage where you were like, no skills, no nothing. This is often when we start when we're like 5 or 7 years old. You're drawing, everything's kind of a bit terrible. You're just kind of figuring it out. And we get better and better and better, right? We expand our abilities. Like, it doesn't really matter where you are on that journey. The thing that'll be consistent is that at every stage, you're going to have to make art and figure out, given my skill set, given my techniques, given what's available to me, how do I make the best thing? And this is always going to be the case, because as artists, the trick is you can always get better. You can always improve your foundation. You can always get better tools, fancier tools. You can always learn new software programs, new rendering techniques, new kit bashing techniques, new photo bashing techniques. There's always something new to learn that will mean that what you're doing looks better just through that technique, just through like consuming and understanding that thing. But at every point, you have to always figure out, given what I have now, how do I make this look good? Because in order to make art, you're always dealing with those restrictions. You're always dealing with a deadline, a budgetary constraint, someone else's silly idea as a professional artist. And the thing that will define you is your ability to kind of take whatever this nonsense is and see if you can make something really cool with it. The second point here that I think is worth making is really going deeper and seeing if we can unpack the idea of the critic, and the way that I think as an artist, certainly for myself, the real thing that changed is my attitude and my ability to critique other people's work. And this is often that transition that people sort of go through where, like, in the beginning, we kind of don't know what we don't know. And then when you sort of start learning stuff, you kind of maybe overestimate your own abilities because you're learning quickly and you can often understand the theory of something. So for me, a good example of this would be I wanted to be a comic book creator. I wanted to be a writer. And I probably built my artistic abilities much earlier on than any sort of writing ability. And I was probably anticipating that I'd work with other writers. But because I felt like I knew about writing, I'd read books on writing. Again, I'd done the consumptive thing. I'd gone out into the world and read all the books that I could find that were really well regarded and recommended on how to write, both comics, prose novels, just prose in general. I would not for a moment suggest that I'm like, you know, a great writer or anything like that. But part of this journey, and I think a lot of us go through, is that sort of fan attitude where you can sort of tell what writing you like and what you don't. You can tell what art you like and what you don't. And early on, again, we often have that thing where we kind of don't know what we don't know. And then you kind of make some progress and you kind of hear some ideas and it kind of seems really easy because someone's explaining it. You've sort of bought the right books, you bought the right materials, you bought the right tools, you bought the tutorial, and you're like, I kind of got this. This is easy. And it's very easy at that point to still be stuck in the fan mentality where we kind of can imagine ourselves making things, but we haven't really done it yet. But we're still kind of very critical. And I think this often stops us from really transitioning and being able to put yourself out there. So what happened for me is that I would be very critical of writers that I kind of saw, stories that I kind of saw, because I sort of had read a bunch of books that sort of told you what a good story was, right? And again, the more you learn about story, the more you kind of realize how ridiculous that is, and the degrees to where often actually the stories that I probably liked as well didn't really fit a lot of those paradigms, and the complexity of actually making something where it's interesting how some things fit those little rules and sometimes they don't. And often what you find is when people get to a really high level of craft, that's when you kind of realize how little you know about how this actually works. Because to a certain degree, even after you're able to put something out there that even people like, it's hard to know what made them like it. It's hard to know why it even worked. And you can see the challenge of this where we know great artists, great writers, great directors have made great films, great products, great books, great art. And then some of they kind of lose that magic. And then now like they can't do it. So there's more to this, right? To really kind of making something interesting and being able to put yourself into it. So basically early on, I was very critical of writing and writers, and I thought I knew everything, and I thought I'd be able to do this really well. And it was really only through going through the fire of actually writing my own book, which I don't think I have a pretty good idea of why I think it maybe didn't go as well as it could, but it certainly wasn't either a commercial or a critical sort of success. And I think just that process of becoming an actual artist where like, oh, I actually made one of those things, completely changes, I think, our attitude towards how we view everything in that space. And I think this is very much the same for artists. So as soon as I kind of actually wrote my own book, wrote my own story, wrote my own fantasy comic, and it was actually published, I kind of really had a newfound appreciation for everything that was written, because I knew how hard it was. And I knew that a lot of those theories and challenges meant nothing, because you actually get into this really complex relationship with the work that you're making. And it's very hard to know, is it good? Is it bad? Again, even when people like it, you're like, why did they like it? And then you make something else and then no one likes it. And it's like, did I like it? Did I get my intent through? Like what happened? Like, it's very complicated to actually make things and put them out into the world and deal with the criticism and the audience reaction, and then our reaction to that, where like sometimes I can be very satisfied with art that I've made where I'm like, this is kind of exactly what I intended to do. I think this is great. And then no one really responds to it that well. And other times I can be like, I don't even know, this seems like it's failing. And then I kind of put it out into the world and everyone likes it. Like it's it's not obvious, and it's very challenging to really deal with the critical aspects of being an artist, the way that we're self-critical, the way that we view other work. So I think the bottom line here to understand is that the more I actually learned how to do something, and the more that I gained knowledge of the challenges involved, the less of a fan I could be in the old school sense, where I kind of viewed a lot of these things that were made, like a lot of books, a lot of stories, a lot of comic book stories. It became almost impossible for me to really be critical as I used to be as a fan, where I'd look at that and go, oh, well, that's terrible. Like, why did they make that silly decision? You kind of understand the more that you do this, that maybe people had a bad month. Maybe that person was going through something challenging. Maybe they had a complicated relationship with the editor. Maybe they weren't feeling it. Like, maybe they kind of wrote themselves into a corner. There's so many ways that these things can go wrong. And I think even when you're successful in some way, shape, or form, there's still the element of like, well, could it have been better? Like, maybe I should have done this. Maybe I should have done that. What am I going to do next? And I guess just the fundamental truth here is, for me, this is a completely different attitude, different human, different animal to the way I viewed everything when I was more of a consumer and a fan of like sort of comic books. And it's the same with video games. Like, once you're inside video game studios and you understand how complex and hard these things are, it's no surprise that so many of these big projects kind of don't turn out well. Like, this stuff is so hard. It is so challenging. But when you're a fan, it seems really obvious. They're like, why didn't they just zig instead of zagging? It's just so clear. But when you're in the middle of it, when you're in the fugue of battle and creation and you're trying to figure out what to do, it is not obvious. It isn't always easy. And you still have to move forward knowing that probably, again, even if you do succeed, there's probably still going to be a huge number of vocal people who are going to hate it, who are going to comment and say they don't like it. Same with this video, same with anything I do. Same with any video game project you're on. Like, you can't please everyone. So anyway, I just feel like this element of the criticism of a fan and a consumer, which is fine. Like, there is nothing wrong with that. And I think it's very nice to be in that position where we are choosing the things that we like. Like, so much of life is a matter of us thinking about what we like and how we define ourselves by, in a capitalistic society, the things we buy, the things we associate with, the things we kind of adorn ourselves with, the things that we relate to. And I think that's a great thing. But as an artist, as a creator of things, you can't really think like that. Or at least I find it very challenging. And I see like a major divide between before, when I was a fan of comics, versus like now when I make comics. And it makes every single comic I read and every single thing that I look at, I view it very differently. And here's the interesting thing. And I think you may be looking at that maybe as a beginner and thinking, okay, well, that means it's really hard. Screw that. But the reality is that what it means for me is that, like, when I go to a comic book convention, I can talk to people who are professional comic book artists who work for big publishers, but I can also go down Artist Alley and anyone can show me their comic, and I understand how hard that was. Like, everyone who has made a comic, because I've done this, I'm sure it's the same for every type of creation, but I know how hard it is to make even a 5-page comic, right? And print it out. That is like a monumental task of creativity, engineering, productivity, focus. And I think what it means is, like, as artists, once you make that transition from being a fan to being a creator, you're kind of like part of this thing where, like, we make things, and I understand how hard that is. And we're all in this together as people who make art. So that's the good thing, hopefully. Let me know in the comments down below. But it really is that once you sort of commit yourself to that pathway on a critical level of, like, I made my little comic, and often in the beginning it's harder because, like, our drawing sort of sucks in the beginning. You're making a comic, you're making some little thing, and it's kind of not as good as you would like it to be. You know that. Everyone knows that. The people who are going to appreciate that are other artists, because we've all done that. We know how hard it is. And I think that's something that's worth appreciating, is that when you do make this transition, it's not a matter of just there being this infinite road of you kind of knowing that, this work you're creating is not good enough, but that this really changes who you are. And it's much less about the quality of the work and the finished result, and it's much more about the process and the challenges and you being able to do what you can with what you have. Lastly, I guess if we just zoom out and look at this concept, this is, on the one hand, a really subtle thing. It may be that you can't just choose to suddenly go from being a fan or a consumer of art to someone who makes things. You kind of need to do it. You need to see how challenging it is. And it's this process of actually doing it that should uncover a lot of these sort of fundamental mindset shifts that I think are so critical. But one of the things I think we can do is try and work on that fear, because the fear is often the friction point. It's the transition. It's rising above the fear that I think can really make a difference. Because a lot of consuming and acquiring sort of knowledge without actually applying it, without actually putting it into practice, is there to stop us making mistakes, right? We don't want to do that thing where you make art and it's terrible. Yet that's what we must do. That is the path forward. And I think if you fundamentally have that viewpoint, this is one of these really interesting things. Again, I see it in the language people use in comments and as students, like the questions people are asking is like, how do I make art if it's not going to be good? And it's because you're sort of viewing it from a consumptive point of view, as in like the art is the thing that is happening. But actually, as an artist, it is the thing that we're doing that's changing. And it's the things that you're learning that are changing. And what we're after is for us to have a little bit more of that control within ourselves, of us deciding what we are and aren't going to do, and getting past that fear of like, what if I make bad art? Like, what if this thing that I've been trying to do and I've been thinking about it for a long time, what if that turns out to be rubbish? It's often that fear that stops us moving forward, because it's not experimental, it's not collaborative, it's not yes and, right? It's kind of saying, what if this is terrible, right? There's a lot of fear there. There's a lot of fear of being judged, of us being the person that previous fan us was critical of. And we try and avoid that as much as possible. But really art, I think anyway, and again, it sounds like I'm in some art theory 101 class, but like this relates to you making manga, to you making concept art, to you drawing like funny little comics and funny little things. Is that fundamentally the path forward is just to make things and focus more on like, what can you do with what you have right now? Do I have a sketchbook and a pencil? Do I have $5,000 worth of Wacom Cintiqs and like workstations? What tools do I have? Do I have a little bit of clay, a little bit of plasticine? Do I have a giant crayon? Do I have my whole setup? Do I have an iPad? Like, what do you have? And what can I make with that? And I think once you understand that there's always limitations, there's always challenges, and that that's something that can inspire you to create, and that that should be the foundation for interesting things, and that like ultimately you kind of have to be a little bit less focused on what other people are going to think of you, right, in that particular genre, and kind of save your fan attitude for other areas, right? There's plenty of things where I can be sort of critical and I can be a fan, but I kind of understand that with a lot of the art that I make, I kind of can't, right? It's a lot harder for me to be critical of people making YouTube videos, right? Before I started making YouTube videos on art, I was hypercritical. I was like, why are all these people doing this kind of stuff? As soon as you get into it, you kind of realize the limitations of algorithms and the fact that like, oh, I get it. If I just said that, no one would listen. The algorithm wouldn't pick it up. And like, even though 5 people might like it, more people wouldn't pick it up. Like, it's kind of, oh, that's why it's like that. That's the game that's being played. Like, oh, that's why these stories are like this, because you've only got 22 pages. Like, that's why they're not always as good as maybe they could be, because people are having to come up with this whole thing in a week. That's why concept art isn't finished, because you have to do it really quickly. There's so many of these fundamental reasons behind the creative choices that people make that are based on limitations of the situation that they're in, the tools that they have, what works, the editors they have to work with, the creative constraints that are placed upon them. So many of these choices we don't actually have control over as artists. Our job is just to make the best that we can with whatever we can. And the sad reality is that often when you see people don't have any of these limitations, despite having technical and artistic skill at every level, often the result is not that good, right? Like there's no correlation between having unlimited possibility, unlimited budget, unlimited scope, and the product of that being good. Like most of the time, that just means that because we don't have those creative limitations, we're just not that creative. And it kind of all just turns out to be a little bit flat. It's the reality is often creative restriction, budgetary restriction, time restriction focuses us on thinking about what we can make with what we have. So hopefully this has been an interesting kind of deep dive into the concept of consuming versus creating art. I'll be really keen to know what you think. Anyway, that's all I got time for in this particular video. If you want to check out a video where I don't talk about art and we actually kind of make something cool in Photoshop, check out this tutorial. It's real-time, fully narrated from start to finish. I show you how to make this in Photoshop. It's a really old one, but I think the image here turned out really well. So give that a go, and yeah, happy drawing.